it is time for us all to give a warm welcome to Justine Stewart, who is about to step forward on the Write the Doc stage, or sideways, however you wish. As documentarians, we know that good communication happens when you have a solid understanding of the audience and purpose when writing. But what if there are lessons that we can learn about good end-user documentation from other types of communication, like news or adverts? Justine will explore the idea that journalism and advertising writing skills can overlap with tech writing, but also she'll suggest areas where those skills don't overlap. Justine used to work for a record company, and through that gig, she's met a bunch of famous people. But she also has a passionate hatred of netball because, in her words, it's just an inferior version of basketball. Now, I'm going to let you all decide which one of those fun facts you pursue in the breaks. But for now, let's welcome Justine Stewart.
Thank you. It is on, yeah. Thanks so much. I want to preface this by telling a very brief story about why I was late this morning, why I was not in a good shape yesterday. So our accommodation is, and this is relevant, I promise, our accommodation has been quite disastrous. And last night I encountered for the very first time a bed bug. Full of my own blood. So this morning I spoke to the manager and she said, listen, I am going to give you a full refund, even if I get sacked for it, because I'm about to resign anyway. And you can ask me later which hotel that was. But the thing is, it's not a hotel, it's student accommodation pretending to be a hotel, which is the issue, and it's substandard accommodation at that. So the moral of that story is that, much like was referred to in Jerry's presentation, there are, throughout human history, there are pressures to do things because it suits the people at the top who have the money, and those of us kind of down the bottom are having to, push back against that. And I think that a lot of the discussions that we've been having in relation to AI in particular do relate to, obviously being aware of it, understanding it, but also knowing when it's time to say, no, this is actually enough, this is my red line, and to be able to support each other as a community in that as well. And I found yesterday and today have been very empowering because as an older female, I'm very reluctant to say, I've got some skepticism about this because sometimes people might perceive that as that I'm a Luddite, I'm out of touch, I don't want to get involved. So obviously I need to be across it and be aware of it, and I just want to say I really appreciate being here amongst everybody because I've got some great stuff to take back, to talk about the pros and the cons of using LLMs and generative AI. So, all that out of the way. So do journalism and writing ads really have anything to do with each other? Well, kind of, at least in my opinion. So right up front, obviously this isn't about that kind of very tech-heavy documentation that many of you work in. This is about external documentation, user guides, how-tos, that kind of thing. So I worked for Events Air, which is an event management software company. I've been there about 2 years, and a big part of my role has been overhauling our knowledge base, making sure that the things that are in the steps of how to do things are actually what is in the platform, because there have been a lot of changes. And also a big part of my role has become translating some of that technical content into user-friendly content. And a lot of our users are in that kind of not very tech-savvy demographic. Some are, of course, but a lot of them are people like, for example, they work at a university organising an academic conference. They've never organised a conference before. Sometimes they've been kind of dragged into this role. So it's really important that the instructions that we give them are user-friendly, and that's where I've drawn some of these tools from advertising and journalism. I must say that please don't be scared by the fact that I worked in advertising. It paid the bills. Also, this presentation may be useful for you in terms of, much like the BrickDocs presentation that Yvonne and Alexandra did yesterday, there are things here that you can use in supporting your colleagues to become better writers also. So I'm going to talk a bit about where journalism, advertising and technical writing, and I'm using technical writing to mean what I do, converge and diverge. Some tips from these disciplines you can borrow and teach, and then a quick dip into emotions, psychology and the science of instructions, because that's something I find really interesting. And underpinning all that, we are going to get a little bit philosophical, much in line with Jerry's presentation. Think about how the word communication is linked to community, because it's about what we do to share that understanding with other people. So, I have a blank slide there because I've pressed the wrong button. Sorry. Okay, that's better. So like lots of SaaS documentation teams, we're focused on helping end users. And throughout my meandering career path, and it has been quite meandering, I figured out there are two things I really like to do, and that's figure stuff out and then to share information. And then more recently, over the last few years, I have figured out that something I've been doing all along is creating step-by-step process documents. I like to write instructions that are going to save other people from having to make the same mistakes I did or having to ask the same questions I did. So I definitely found like I've found my people here, which is pretty exciting. I studied journalism. I worked in radio advertising for a record label. I worked as a journalist of sorts for a parenting magazine, but we didn't just do like how to feed your child. We also did, a little bit of investigating different issues and stuff. So that was as close as I got to being a real journalist. But while I was thinking about all these things, in regard to this presentation, I wanted to think about what they have in common. So I want to bridge that how-to gap in all those different areas of my career. That's what I've been doing. Oh, that was not the slide I was expecting, sorry. So when you're teaching someone else to write, it does take a little while to get them to make that mental shift into, getting across those real fundamentals, to know your audience and know your purpose. And we spoke briefly yesterday, I'm not sure if it was I think it was actually in one of the workshops. If you've ever been given something where someone said, can you just do a quick proofread of this? But in fact, you look at it and go, hang on a minute, this was written for a completely different audience, completely different purpose. I'm going to have to rewrite it. Sometimes going back to the person and giving them that message is a bit tricky. So maybe by using some of these tools, it'll be easier to explain to them why. So this is the slide I was expecting earlier. So looking at those different types of writing, news stories, opinion pieces, advertising, so that includes websites and brochures and marketing emails, and then how-to or other software documentation. So I extensively researched, using a focus group of 1, what it's like to write these kinds of documents, and I want you to think about whether or not you agree with what I found out. So later on in this presentation, I'll show you a chart, a table, and along the top row, I put news stories, and I'm talking about proper old school hard news stories, which are a bit harder to find these days. But if you go to a site like Australian Associated Press, if you're not familiar with that style of news writing, that's the kind of hard facts style. And then there are opinion pieces, and we're kind of drowning in those these days. They sort of pass for news a lot of the time. A lot of emotional content is in there. And then there's advertising, we all know what that is. And then external documentation. And I considered what were the must-haves or requirements for these kinds of documents? What are the benchmarks or goals? So how well is the information researched? Are there rules about the structure? Perhaps, versioning or, making sure that things are updated regularly. What's more important, conveying information or getting an emotional reaction? So we'll start with journalism. In theory, again, it's about finding out the facts and relaying them. So some of the techniques you might use are the 5 W's and the H we spoke about yesterday, the classic, who, why, when, where and why. I've gone with a penguin theme here. I wasn't aware that Melbourne has its own viral penguin, so shout out to the Pesto fans. So in my example here, and again, this is an example that you might use to illustrate to somebody else who's not so, aware of different writing techniques, that this is a technique they might like to use. So 40 rare penguins were recaptured this morning after they escaped from the Brisbane Zoo last night because a gate was accidentally left open by a trainee worker. Tells you everything you need to know. And these days you might see, watch video, escapee penguins return to zoo, bringing delight to school visitors. You won't believe what happens. Doesn't tell you anything. In an opinion piece, you might see the government must do something about how penguins are being unfairly treated in captivity. So it's designed to incite anger or fear. And then in software documentation, how that can be a really useful technique to teach people is you give that one sentence description of where to find the feature, an overview of what it does, why and when you'd use it. And there's an example there. And that's, can be really helpful to an end user rather than landing on a page and going, why am I doing all these steps? Next, journalism technique, clarity and precision. So you are supposed to avoid emotive words and stick to the facts. Example here, research shows 30% of citizens now say they're afraid of penguins, which some are calling penguin paranoia or penguinoia for short. In the opinion piece, you might see penguinoia has hit record levels since the GPE. That would be the Great Penguin Escape. Software documentation, but we're not paid by the word. Sometimes in reading some software documentation, I think, did they think they were getting paid by the word? Cut some out. But shorter isn't always better. Obviously that's something that you need. Sometimes you need to get feedback on that and get someone else to have a read, see what they think. In a similar vein, thinking like a newcomer gets progressively more difficult, obviously. So it's always ideal if you can, and again, this is something that you may do already, but your, tech colleagues that aren't so used to writing might not realise that it's a good idea to get someone else to test out that documentation and see if it actually works. In journalism, you need to state the facts. So one of the things that I found really interesting when I studied journalism is that you're supposed to say, Ms. Andrews said she saw the penguins, not Ms. Andrews saw the penguins. And that distinction is really important when you think about it. But I didn't think about it until I learnt it, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's not the same thing. Someone saying this happened isn't the same thing, or someone saying they felt a certain way isn't the same thing as they actually felt that way. So don't look out the window. Get up on the roof and check and see if there's a sprinkler before you confirm if it's raining. In an opinion piece, of course, lots of emotionally loaded words, only one side of the story. It's all designed to change someone's mind. And changing someone's mind might be a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing to try to change someone's mind on an issue. In software documentation, unless it's being used for marketing purposes, you usually don't need adjectives, but you will sometimes see those creeping in. So sometimes as an editor, it's our role to kind of go, no, not those. And again, test things out and verify that they work the way they're supposed to. An example we had recently was a Zoom API connection, and Zoom changed all their stuff, and we had to go through and test everything and make sure that it did actually work the way it used to, and alter the document to make that happen. Whereas if we just said, oh yeah, that's what we used to have there, we'll just leave that there, it would have been a problem. Journalism, you strive for balance. So if you've got a media release from the zoo, it might not mention the scandal that happened last week. So you have to dig deeper and look for another angle. And a balanced opinion piece is going to show different sides of the story so that the reader can make up their own mind. But this doesn't mean quoting flat earthers in the name of balance. We did see a lot of that during COVID, I think, where it was kind of like, oh, we have to get someone who says the opposite to this person. Yeah, well, maybe not. What other audiences might be reading this document? That's a really important thing to think about in software documentation, because we do get a little bit of groupthink happening where we haven't thought about, maybe there are people using our software in non-standard ways, and we might need to put in something in there for them to explain, how this applies to them. All right, everyone's favourite topic. I don't know about you, I have a love-hate relationship with advertising. When it's intrusive, it's really awful. When it's good, it helps us discover useful products and services and choose between them. And it does keeps us in our jobs a lot of the time. And I definitely prefer working in documentation to marketing, but you have to think about even something like your API endpoint documentation still has to appeal to people. If they think it's not for them, then you still, you've lost their attention, you've lost their interest. That's a problem. So writing to a hard limit is something that I learned when working in radio. My best friend and worst enemy was the stopwatch. And when I first started, I could very easily write a 30-second ad that was actually 45 seconds when I timed it. I got better, but shaving those last couple of seconds off a 30-second radio ad can be really difficult, and it definitely teaches you that discipline of how can I say this more succinctly and more clearly. And I'm not very good at that. I think, I don't know how you feel, but sometimes as writers we do want to over-explain things, so it's quite an important thing to be able to go through and cut something back. Sometimes you need a little time away from it after you've written it, come back and have a look and go, actually I could have said that more simply. And so again, software documentation, do we add more because the page can go on and on, in theory, forever? Or do we actually need to cut out? And that's something that I guess comes with experience, with feedback, but you need to be the editor and make the call and explain why. I think that being able to give you reasons for something can sometimes be just as important as actually knowing what to do in that situation. Oh, another thing actually in radio is that you have to be really fast. So like sometimes you have a brief and then you have to have the radio ad on the air the next day. And as someone who, you know, used to be a lot slower and kind of like to take my time with these things, I had to learn to just be able to write a lot more quickly. Even more so than I think journalists in some ways. You know, clients can be very demanding. It's an advertising technique that you find yourself using is to interpret and translate what you've been told. So the client gives you information, you accept it in good faith, but you can ask questions. So again, step through the process yourself, make sure that things do actually what they're supposed to do, not what someone told you they do, and if they don't happen exactly as they're written, then do a rewrite. I don't know what's happened there now. I actually did press the right button there. There we go. So this is what happens when a graphic designer doesn't read what you've written and they just want to make it look nice. So we've got our values that hardly overlap at all with trust, partnership, innovation and performance. That is a real example from all-time design, bad graphic design examples. I've actually worked with graphic designers who said to me flat out, look, words don't really matter. People just look at the graphics, and I said, well, I'll just not write anything then, see how you go with that. Didn't go down very well. But I do work with a fantastic designer now. She's terrific. So, you know, you will obviously need to make sure that whatever you're doing, it's well presented so people can read it, but don't let style triumph over substance. Persuasive language. This is an interesting one. I found that in going through a lot of our older documentation, there was a lot of simply click this or just do this. I don't like it. Show of hands, who thinks that's a good thing to have in documentation? Okay, good. I don't know, maybe I'm alone here, I don't know. Yeah, so, and you will perhaps find that in documents written by other people, in their attempt to be user-friendly and audience-friendly, they will have that sort of, you know, remember to and just, you know, and again, get your metaphorical red pencil out and get rid of those. You know, it's well meant, but I think ultimately people find it patronising. Dunno. Oh, okay. Having a little. All right. So this is my, and I do want to say actually I went very old school with my slides deliberately because I thought that was fitting, and so you'll notice the retro vibe. I walked in yesterday to Lara's presentation and thought, holy cow, I'm really. But anyway, I hope that you got that as a nod to retro styling. So here's my chart. And this one goes out with apologies to anyone who's studied educational theory, pop psychology or marketing, because they love a diagram, they love an acronym. And so this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also something that I did. So you'll see along the top row there, you've got those different categories of documents, and then down the left I put those benchmarks. So is the information researched? Is it absolutely accurate above all else? Information is being conveyed, understanding is increased. It's got to be produced quickly, it's written clearly and simply, It uses an established format or structure. It follows rules about record keeping and timely updates. It considers other angles or viewpoints. It arouses interest. The audience has been researched, so not the facts in the article, but the audience reaction. The reader will have an emotional response and the reader will take action. And I'm using reader to mean consumer. So then I did this really fun exercise. It was fun for me. We put these things into Excel and you give each cell a score and then it will colour or shade the cell in relation to what weighting you put on that. And ta-da! So as you can see there, there are some differences and some commonalities. And this was a way of putting into a diagram what I already felt, which was that writing that kind of software documentation instruction, I think, is quite close to writing a news story, because the emphasis is on getting the facts right, getting the information across, not the frills, not the emotional content. Whereas, you know, opinion piece is a bit of a segue there, and then advertising content, obviously much more focused on that emotional, getting that emotional reaction. Not to say that those things are good or bad, but just it was interesting to think about those things in relation to each other. One thing that you will see is that the accuracy and increasing understanding is something that I felt was common to all of those types of documents. And yeah, it was just, it was quite a good thought exercise, I suppose, to have a look at how I felt those documents compared. And again, it might be something that in your own workplace, depending on what people's experiences are of those different types of writing, that you might be using something like this idea in an instructional way to help people think more about their writing. Whether it's news, advertising or technical writing, AI or LLM has no biology, and we're mostly running for humans. Why is that important? Well, because we have lips, tongue, teeth, and a machine doesn't have to worry about that. So that's why you'll find you're often a really, telltale sign of something that's been written by AI is that the sentences are really clunky. They're hard to read aloud. And I've had to pick up in our organisation when people in another department have been using AI. It's a bit of a giveaway because you try and read it aloud and you go, oh, hang on a minute, why have you put those two words together? And that's something you learn in radio, is to make sure that it sounds good. So unless you were born hearing impaired, the first sound you will hear is ba-dum, ba-dum, or pa-dum, pa-dum, as Kylie would have it. And so the best writing of any kind, I maintain, follows a rule. And you can help others to improve their writing by teaching them the rule. Anyone want to guess what the rule is? Corn dog? No, it's writing for the ear. So basically, make sure that it has that rhythm, it is appealing to listen to. That's just a great tip to improve your writing, whatever kind of writing you do. Anyone familiar with the lyric that begins, I had some help. It ain't like I can make this kind of mess all by myself. Now, I find that lyric fascinating because I listen to it and think, I kind of hate this song, but I also, it is undeniably catchy, and I think it's that rhythm and rhyme and all those things, and I don't think AI is at the stage yet where it can do that kind of writing. It's trained on, as we know and we've been talking about, it's trained on all those bad examples of writing. So, you find the seamlessly and the tapestry and all those words, and I did have some other real world examples, but I think we're going to have more of that in the next session, so I won't worry about those. Sorry? Oh, okay. Yes, I think that was one. There were obviously in some of those discussion panels where they talk about slop, they're really picking up on those bad habits of AI. So, and another thing that we have as humans is emotions. So since the 1970s, people have actually put a lot of thought into studying how we process instructions. So we don't always want to even follow the instructions. And this was something that they found out again during the 70s, looking at people with household appliances. This is an even more unscientific diagram. Um, but yeah, basically sometimes the people that we're talking to don't even want to read the stuff that we're providing for them. So we have to overcome that first off. So what helps or hinders our ability to follow instructions? Well, the concept of working memory is important here, and that's the process by which we see it, we pay attention to it, we process it, we make a mental picture or encode it, and then it can move to our long-term memory. It can only do that after we've done all those things. It's got limited capacity, so it's overloaded, stuff gets lost. And something that I've found quite interesting to learn about is how negative emotions, anxiety or stress or pressure to do something quickly, they create a heavy cognitive load all on their own, and they reduce our ability to learn and remember new information. Whereas positive emotions, it's kind of like a double effect. Positive emotions not only aren't negative, but they also improve our ability to learn and remember because, you know, they create the chemical environment in the brain that helps us to encode information. So I think that's something really important to think about when we're considering the context in which our users might be following instructions. So we try to minimise overloading, and we obviously do that by using simple language, breaking things down into steps, using curiosity and humour to keep people more interested in what we're writing within reason. And immediate action is something that helps with perception and encoding. So if you can work out a way to get people to actually follow that step straight away, and that's coming more and more into play in user guides that are actually within the platform, that kind of thing, helps them remember. Controlling the rate of information is important. If the user can control that themselves and then come back and review later, that's been shown to help them remember it. There's also some weird things like what's called societal rules and the history effect, and that's to do with are the people around you also learning the same thing? Are they expected to? Are there any repercussions if they don't? That can actually affect how people learn and remember. And metacognition and self-regulation. This is where, you know, if you can get people to be aware of their own learning, and this is something that's pretty, you know, trendy in schools now. It's a bit difficult to get kids to do it, I think, but the idea is that you're able to recognise maybe where you're under a heavy cognitive load and say, I'm going to come back to this later, or you know, you might make checklists because you've discovered that's the most effective way for you to learn. So thinking about your own, getting people to think about their own ability to learn and also to regulate their emotions so that they're learning in the best environment. Verbal versus written. Listening obviously requires less effort, but written you can get more details across more efficiently. In verbal instruction, if the steps are sequential and one gets lost, then kind of all the rest fall away, and written's more likely to be remembered. You can do both, but interestingly, even though we want to do them both at the same time, that actually increases cognitive load. So it's something to think about. The order in which instructions are given. I know this is a favourite of Yvonne's, and it is very important. I was going to show you a clip from an old TV series called MASH here, but we had some technical hitches with that. MASH stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and in this scene, they're trying to defuse a bomb. And they get told, cut the wires leading to the clockwork fuse at the head, but first remove the fuse. It's a bit of a classic. So yeah, do A before doing B is a much better way to say it than before you do B, do A. So here's where I get a bit philosophical again. Facts do matter. Clear and accurate software documentation helps people understand what they're doing with a given application. Proper journalism, not propaganda, sticks to the facts and helps people understand how democracy works. In what's been called a post-truth era, I'm really glad to be part of a community that we're present, we're human, and we're actually focusing on objective reality. And you might have seen a movie in which a character who's acting will say, what's my motivation? I think that's something that it's good for us to ask ourselves that as well. So some of the questions I came up with for myself are, am I motivated by genuine curiosity about how something works and wanting to share that knowledge once I get it? And that helps me a bit on days when I'm like, oh, I've got so much to do today, reminding myself of why I'm doing this and why I enjoy it. If I'm not sure about something, will I ask questions, even if I'm worried I should know? I've only been working in software for a couple of years. I always did have that interest in all the technical side of things and writing process stuff before that, but I am very conscious of not wanting to ask a question that makes me look like an idiot. Usually I go ahead and do it anyway, and it's fine, but that's something that's part of managing, I guess, our own emotions in situations like that. And am I thinking about the reader more than myself? So I argue that makes us a better writer if we can become more altruistic. So am I doing this because I genuinely love it and because I genuinely want to help people? I would say ultimately, if the answer to this is yes, you won't just be happier, you'll be doing a better job at writing. And that's all I got.
Let's start with Cameron up the back. If you can run the mic to him.
I'm going to take off my glasses because they're really bad.
Testing.
It's good for reading, but no, I'm just in that in-between eyesight stage. Lots of fun.
I love that talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I was really fascinated by your idea of rhyme and making it sound good. And God, look, I think there's a whole talk to do on that. And I want to know the secret sauce. I'd love you to expand a bit on that and give some examples of what that actually is.
Yeah, sure. So I think I grew up. My mum actually worked in a record shop when I was a kid, when that was a thing, so I started going to concerts from a really young age because she had free tickets. So music's always been a really big part of my life. I can't play an instrument, but I do like to sing and I love to listen to all kinds of music. So I think that was part of why I tuned into that, and even song lyrics or something that I can remember a stupid amount of song lyrics. I wish I could monetize that, but anyway. But as I studied writing, I realised that things like, Shakespeare's iambic pentameter is a great example of where we respond to that rhythm in the writing and go, that sentence sounds really good. I'm not sure why. You probably have noticed in presentations where people will say something like, and there's the first principle, and there's the second principle, and there's the third principle. And already you can sort of hear that cadence change. And as listeners, we kind of respond to that and go, that sounds good. Like in the same way a chord sounds good, we feel that resolution of, the sentence rising and falling. Something my kids used to love to get me to do was to report on the situation. So it'd be like, a family of 3 went to the ice cream shop today, and they just really love that kind of that newsreader voice. So I guess if you read things aloud, and that was something that I had to do when I was writing radio ads, is that I was reading it aloud because that's the only way to you can't read it in your head and get an accurate time on it. So the more you do it, the better you get at it, I guess, if that helps.
I'm looking for a checklist to put into review criteria. And to actually go in and say, like literally, if I were to put 5 bullet points down and say, when you are reviewing this, make sure it's got, if you could finish that sentence.
I would say, like, rhythm is something that most people can sort of learn. If they don't know how to do it straight away, they can kind of learn to hear the rhythm in a sentence. Read it aloud. Like, also reading my own writing aloud helps me pick up errors because your eye can very easily skip over something. When you're reading it quickly, you see what you expect to see. When you're reading it aloud, you go, oh, hang on, there's an extra and in there I didn't notice. But we're not used to reading things aloud. So I would say that's probably, if you read it aloud and it sounds good, or if you read it aloud and you're actually having trouble reading it aloud because the sentence is too long or the construction is clunky, you'll learn that by reading it aloud, whereas you'll skim over it if you're just reading it in your head.
Yeah, that's great. Simo, we might get the mic down the front. I know that when I was doing all the intros for this, I have to read them aloud, and I usually find that when I do, I go, well, that's rubbish. And I have to completely refactor them. So it really does make a difference to hear what you're actually speaking. It's massive.
We've got a few hands up.
Yeah.
So when you brought up your big table with your weightings and everything, I noticed that in
how-to / other software documentation, you actually had like audience research weighted 0. I'm curious about your reasoning there.
Sorry, no, and I actually, I was very mindful of time, so I did skip over a little bit in relation to that. So yes, definitely in an ideal world, we do have some research on how are people responding. Is this more effective? A/B testing, all that kind of stuff. I think it's more that I guess you don't want to be in a situation where you're just at the mercy of what somebody said, the data said about the audience, because I think that leads you very quickly down the marketing road. And one thing that when I worked in radio, I used to have arguments with the. Have you ever? Do people listen to the radio anymore? So you might have noticed. You've ever been listening? No, no. Okay. When you listen to the radio, sometimes I do because I'm kind of addicted to it, mostly critiquing it in my head. But you'll hear an old song, you go, bloody hell, I haven't heard that song for years. And then next week you hear it again. Oh, yeah? Had experienced that? Yeah. Do you know why? Because people who work in radio have this thing where they go, oh, we can't play something unless we've researched it. And when they research it, this is what they do, because I used to work in this too. They ring people up and they go, hey, have you heard this song? Do you like this song? Are you sick of this song? And they only play recurrence if they research well. And what they do is put that recurrent back into rotation, play it for about a month, and then they take it out again, which is really annoying as a listener, because you're like, the whole joy of hearing that song again completely dissipates. I just feel like Clippy. You know, the second time you're like, hang on, I heard this a few weeks ago. The third time you're like, bloody hell, like I'm actually sick of this song again. You know, like
all those radio stations that actually play everything on a 4-hour loop.
Yes, high rotation, which is the advertising principle of, like, if we repeat it often enough, it's gonna get in. So marketing research can lead you down a road where you're just like, you know, it's like, I always used to say, it's like asking kids what they want to eat. You're just going to give them lollies, you know, like, no. So it's a bit like that, where I think you have to have good guidelines, I guess, that you're not always doing what people say they want, because that's not necessarily the best thing. It's tricky.
Look, I would, if it's quick, yes. All right, let's go with it. Let's do it.
Thanks. Just back on rhythm, I just thought I might have something for Cameron's checklist. We like writing short sentences as technical writers, but that can become really monotone if you just stick to that. So it's nice to just break it up a little bit with occasional longer sentences, a bit of a different form every now and then. Yeah,
that's really good advice, definitely.
Yeah, one more, just over the back.
Can I just add to that? Play it to music, like say it out loud with music in the background and see if it just resonates.
Like some beats in the background. Yeah, okay.
Like
you might make a hit single out of it.
Or like maybe a metronome or something like that. So hear like a cadence.
Just have a cadence.
All right. Folks, this has been really great. Thank you, everyone, for the great questions coming through. And, of course, thank Justine.
I'm so honoured. It's so nice to be here, especially after my traumatic evening. Thank you.